A top U.S. general has just issued a very stark and a very serious warning of what could be coming next and what could be happening. And a act like this from NATO and from the United States could potentially bring us closer to a nuclear event, to nuclear weapons being used in response to this plan that NATO and the US has. They have a plan to seize territory of Russia and also potentially seize Russian nuclear weapons. That is what a top US Army general just warned Russia and just warned the world of. So let's get into this really quick. Let's watch this video and then we will talk more about it and what's going on and what this means and what could happen in the aftermath of something like this going down, because this could be the trigger for something big, or it could just be the fizzle out and the collapse of the Russian government potentially. So let's get into all this. I want you guys to watch this video really quick. This is talking about a top NATO commander who is part of the US military, and he is warning that NATO is making plans to seize Kaliningrad, which is a Russian territory in between Poland and Lithuania. So let's watch this.
President Trump and Ukraine's leader are said to be working on a deal that would supply Kyiv with additional American weapons in exchange for something the U.S. needs. This comes as one of the top American military officials has harsh words for Moscow. Here's Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin.
We're going to break down each part of the eastern flank deterrence line.
The top U.S. Army commander in Europe with a stark warning to Russia days after its former prime minister proposed launching preemptive strikes against NATO countries. General C.D. Donahue says NATO has a plan to neutralize and seize Russia's Kaliningrad, a missile-packed Russian exclave between Poland and Lithuania. Quote, "Our forces and allies can wipe it off the face of the earth faster than ever before," adding urgency to a new mega weapons deal being hashed out by Presidents Trump and Zelensky.
Ukraine can sell to the United States of America a large number of drones. In turn, I am discussing with President Trump so that Ukraine can buy the weapons, primarily air defense. This is truly a mega deal, win-win.
The U.S. would gain from Ukraine's battlefield expertise with converted off-the-shelf commercial drones like the ones that recently launched a surprise attack from behind enemy lines and took out most of Russia's long-range bombers.
U.S. bases are very vulnerable to this exact type of attack.
The Army just signed a $43 million contract with Epirus for a high-powered microwave counter-drone technology known as Leonitis, which creates a field of energy that pulses and fries incoming drones.
It is similar, very much so, to a force field like we've seen in the movies.
Defense Secretary Hegseth, building on the replicator program started under the last administration, launched a new drone initiative earlier this month to cut through Pentagon red tape so the U.S. military can buy drones en masse. In the meantime, Ukraine says it already has the technology and can help the U.S. military.
All right, so you heard that there. There was a lot packed into just that 2-minute video. But the biggest thing was General Donahue warning that they could, quote, wipe Kaliningrad off the face of the earth. This is a pretty serious threat and pretty serious warning. This is potentially like one of the most serious warnings I've heard coming from U.S. officials, at least, threatening Russia directly. Most of the time it's coming from Ukrainian officials or other officials, but now we are seeing U.S. directly starting to threaten them. And I think what's going on behind the scenes is that Trump keeps getting burned, okay? Trump keeps talking to Putin on the phone and having negotiations, and then he comes out and saying, hey, we have this deal, things are going to stop, and then Putin makes him look like a clown, makes him look like a fool, because as Trump is making this announcement, he's bombing Ukraine, right, and knocking out their power grid and hitting their critical infrastructure at the same time. Okay, this has happened a few times now since he's been in office, since January, and I believe Trump's kind of allowing his generals to take the gloves off and to kind of up the pressure and saying, hey, we could seize territory too, right? Whether this is a good move strategically or not, that's left to be debated. It's definitely a major escalation and could lead to a nuclear reaction from Russia. And Russia's even saying, they're quoted multiple different officials saying that if anything ever happened to Kaliningrad, then there would be a nuclear response, right, to the US and anyone that is participating in the seizure of it, right? And Russia actually holds nuclear weapons inside of Kaliningrad itself, right? So the US and NATO would seize those nuclear weapons as well too. This is a major threat coming from the US, and it's something that they could do. Right? This is something that's actually realistic, and there's really not much Russia could do except threaten to, blow up the world and unleash their nuclear weapons, which is 100% nobody wants that. Okay, but in a military strategy sense, there's really not much they can do. Kaliningrad is completely surrounded by NATO territory and is only accessible through the sea, or if Russia bolstered through NATO countries like Lithuania, and Poland, but that is very unlikely, right, for them to do that, because then that would trigger Article 5 and all these other things. So this is a really big card that they are playing, I believe, and I think that Trump is allowing this general to come out and kind of make some threats to put the pressure on Russia and Putin to say, hey, you need to come to the table and you need to make a deal and you need to make this war stop, because that's been a big campaigning thing for him, is that he is going to be able to stop this war. He's always said he's going to be able to stop the Ukraine war, as soon as he gets in, as soon as he talks to Russia, and it hasn't happened yet. Right, so I think now they're taking a different strategy form of putting pressure on this way, right, and saying, look, we might seize your territory. And they, in the international sense, they could potentially, in the geopolitical sense, to other countries, because there's going to be pushback. Countries like China are going to be like, oh, this is a major violation, of international norms, seizing this territory. But they could come back and say, well, Russia was seizing Crimea from Ukraine and seized the Crimean Peninsula actually years ago. I think it was seized in like 2014 under Obama. And they could say, hey, you've seized Crimea, you've seized all this territory in Ukraine, and that could be their justification, is that they're going to seize this Russian territory now. So that would be their justification, if there was any type of like international backlash or geopolitical backlash from places like the UN, or they tried to stop it, they could potentially try to even justify something like this happening, right? And obviously no one wants this to happen. We just want peace and we want this to stop, but it's like that's not happening realistically. And this is becoming a major threat, this war. This is now becoming more about NATO versus Russia. It's always been a proxy war about that, but now it's more directly becoming NATO versus Russia, because NATO, all the NATO countries actually just agreed as well to up their defense spending for NATO contributions up to 5%. I believe it was only at 1.5%, and now it's at 5% contributions. So a 3.5% increase. That's a lot of GDP, 5% of their GDP. That's actually a good amount, right? That's actually a lot of money that's going towards NATO defense spending, and Trump has been putting pressure on for these countries to do this because the US has been the primary funder of NATO, and now these other countries are coming to the table as well too and paying their fair share, right? So this is definitely not a good sign though, right, for the world. They're increasing defense spending and at the same time saying they're going to seize Kaliningrad. That doesn't sound like the war is going to stop anytime soon. And if that happens, then that is going to trigger NATO, Russia, and the US to be directly in conflict with each other, right? And potentially Russia would start hitting targets inside of Europe, right? If they're already at war with NATO, they might as well hit NATO. Okay, so targets inside of Europe could be hit, and potentially even targets in the US could be hit, and especially cyber targets, soft targets like that, where it's not directly bombs being dropped, those are going to be hit as well too. Things like critical infrastructure, banking systems, online systems, social media platforms, things like that will be hit for sure, 100%, if this war does pop off, right? And there's a lot of speculation too that if Kaliningrad is seized successfully, then this could cause a competency crisis within the Russian government, where people would no longer believe in the Russian government if they can't protect Kaliningrad, and this war's been going on for so long, and there's been, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young men that have died from this. People might start losing hope, right? They have their own internet there, so a lot of the propaganda is on lock, so they're able to really control the narrative inside of Russia and keep people in their comfort zone where they don't get too upset or too worried about anything. But they wouldn't be able to ignore this if Kaliningrad was seized. People would know there's people living in Russia, in Kaliningrad, they have relatives there. People would know, word would spread, and competency in the Putin government would potentially collapse. It could be the end, potentially, of his presidency, if something like that. Imagine if like Alaska was seized, or like Hawaii was seized while Trump was in office. It would be a major deal. They would try to like impeach him or something along those lines, most likely, and a lot of people would lose hope and lose faith in the president. All right, so that's similarly what would happen here, and they're talking about it openly now, threatening it in the open. So, and if the Russian government collapsed, that could lead to a whole nother host of issues of nuclear weapons getting in the wrong hands, social unrest, certain terror groups, certain groups moving into Russia and taking over, establishing dominance, right? All these things could happen. Or they could just hit the panic button and start launching nukes into Europe, and maybe even at the US potentially, especially at Ukraine. They could start just dropping nukes in Ukraine, so especially tactical nukes, right? If they seize Kaliningrad, I would estimate 90% chance of tactical nukes being used in Ukraine from Russia, right? So, and then that just escalates again and creates a snowball effect. Now there might be a nuclear response from NATO or Ukraine or the US, right? So it's one of these things this needs to stop, but how does it, right? We really don't know. They're also talking about this Leonitis drone defense system, which is something that everyone should be aware of. These drones are so unregulated. And remember when all the military bases a few months ago were swarmed with drones, and then they just came out and they were like, oh, actually it was nothing. It was just not a big deal, and it was like federal government drones, and don't worry about it. Do you remember that? The whole towns in New Jersey's being swarmed with drones, military bases constantly, and I made multiple videos on it, and I had air traffic control reports on it too, of drones swarming the military bases and them reporting it and shutting down air traffic to the military base, right? This was happening multiple bases all over the country, and they were even reporting large UAPs shutting down runways and shutting down planes and shutting down military operations, right? So if it was the military or federal government, why would they be shutting down these operations for them? And the air traffic controllers are acting confused and concerned and worried about these UAPs, right? So all these drones are a major threat, right? They could swarm military bases, they can hit critical infrastructure, they can hit the power grid, they can hit nuclear power plants, cause nuclear disasters. All right, look at what they did to Russia last month or 2 months ago, whenever that was, where Ukraine brought in a bunch of semis filled and vans filled with drones, and then they open up the back of them. They got them close to their targets inside of Russia at these military bases to hit their nuclear bombers and their planes, and they got them close. They drove them in, opened them up, and then launched their drone operation from inside of Russia. All right, Ukraine did. This can happen inside the United States at any point. The United States border has been open, wide open for 4 years straight. Okay, we don't even know exactly what's inside the US. I made a video last year when Biden was still in, reporting how there were reports from Border Patrol agents and it was even confirmed by local news reports, of things like RPGs being smuggled into the country. Okay, things like grenade launchers and rocket launchers. Okay, talks of this and reports of it and confiscations of it being smuggled into the country, right? And they were worried that there's even more of these being smuggled in that they didn't find and that they don't know about, right? So there's definitely a lot of things going on, and these drones too can just be bought domestically in the United States and then be equipped with explosives or even biological agents or contaminants that can release things onto the public just from flying over, right? So there's all these possibilities with drones. It's surprising that they're still so highly unregulated and they really don't have a grip on them, and it proves that they don't. A few months ago, or 6 months ago, whenever that was, when the drone craze was going on. And something else with these drones too, this is why they need this Leonitising, which is essentially a EMP like weapon. It's a directed energy weapon that shoots an electromagnetic pulse, most likely a microwave, high-powered microwave radiation pulse at these drones when they get within a certain radius, and it wipes out their electronics, all right, and it neutralizes the drone, essentially fries their onboard electronics by surging them with electrical energy and overloading them and overheating them. But one thing that they've been doing in places like Ukraine is that they have drones on super long cables. So they will have a drone that's on like a 5-mile long fiber optic cable that is literally attached to the drone while it's flying, and it's just carrying that cable behind it. They're pretty light, to mitigate the effect of the EMP, right? Because it's a wired connection and it's grounded to a different system that's far away, that's not being hit by the electromagnetic pulse. So it allows them to bypass a lot of these EMP pulse weapons, these directed energy weapons, to wipe out the drones, right? So that's another, they're adapting, right? The technology is adapting. That's not extremely practical, these wired drones, but they're still being used all over Ukraine. I've seen dozens of videos of them being used on people, right? And on targets. It's insane. Some of these videos that come out of Ukraine are inhumane, right? Some of them I just wish I didn't even see it, and a lot of times I just skip them if they look like it's something really bad, like, you know, a drone just chasing somebody down or something like that. I don't want to see that, but those videos do pop up, and they are happening in Ukraine, right? And stuff like that could happen here in the US, and it's very dystopian and nightmarish to think about, right? So that's the other thing that they're working on, and they're definitely worried about these drones. There's these Club K units as well too, where they're worried about things like shipping containers being used to import these drones, and also shipping containers being used to house missile systems that are able to get close to the US or just right offshore in ships and shipping container, and shipping vessels. It could just be loaded up with these Club K shipping container missile systems as well too, that open up from the top and then they fire missiles into the land, right? So they're worried about all these things. And another thing that I wanted to pinpoint on these drones too is that, 75% of them, maybe even more, it's the majority percent of them are made in China. And the software is Chinese, and it has backdoors, Chinese backdoors in these drone technologies, even domestic ones that you can buy, like civilian drones in the US. And potentially these drones could be taken over at some point, right? There are backdoors in them. There's even geo fencing that goes on with them, where they can block the drone from flying in certain areas. So why couldn't they make the drone fly certain areas? All right, there's potentially backdoors in these drones, and they could be used in mass, maybe activated, even civilian drones all at once, to cause chaos, and or even maybe to overheat, explode, cause fires. All right, we've seen these weird things happen with, look at these pagers that Israel had, that they gave out years before, and then they were able to be activated. That could be happening right now with tons of different electronics and things like that are coming from other countries. They could have backdoors in them, right? So that's definitely a concern with these drones too. And they have this geo fencing with it. And something to note is when all this drone fiasco chaos was going on with the military bases, a lot of these drone Chinese companies, there's one that's like one of the biggest ones, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but they refuse to put up the geo fencing, which blocks the drone from flying anywhere. It's essentially like a block. The drone can only fly to here and then it stops. It's like an invisible fence for it. And they refused to put it up for the military bases when all this stuff was going on, right? There were some companies that did it, but I remember that one of the biggest Chinese drone companies did not put up the geofencing to stop people from flying these drones in these certain areas that were problem areas, right? Some companies did it, other companies didn't. So that's another thing, is that they have a lot of control and a lot of power. The FAA does command them to do things, but a lot of times they don't listen, and they don't have to listen with certain things. So let me know what you guys think down below about all this stuff, right? Top U.S. general and commander of NATO is warning that the U.S. is going to seize Kaliningrad. Let me know what you think about that, and let me know what you think the response would be from that as well too. Is that a good strategy, or is that just going to escalate things even further? It's one of these things. War is never good. It's never a good option, right? But we're in the middle of it, and how do they get it to stop? And we're kind of running out of options. It seems like, the U.S. has tried a lot of peace and talk negotiations, but nothing has stuck. Nothing has gone through. So it seems like this is their strategy now, is to now start escalating things themselves. Russia's always threatening these escalations of nuking and nuclear tidal waves, nuclear subs that are going to hit off the East Coast and cause a nuclear tsunami and tidal wave. They're always getting these threats from Russia. And now we're getting some threats back to Russia, right? So maybe that's the strategy now. Maybe that's the thing that they respond to and they understand. Maybe that's their language. I don't know. I'm just like wargaming and thinking out these different scenarios here. I want peace overall, because all we're getting really from this is hundreds of thousands of European men are dying, right? These people are brothers, and this shouldn't be happening. So thank you guys. Hope you have big blessings for your life, your family, and I hope you have a big old blessed day.